Hi, I'm Chris Epting, and welcome to The World It Is. We have a very special guest with us tonight, one of the true survivors of both the literary and now the music world. His name is Jim Carroll. And Jim, first of all, the people you grew up with that you chronicle so aptly in the basketball diaries, what made you different? How come you made you go high and, farther than they did? Or what pulled you out of the situation you were in the Lower East Side, exactly?
I don't know. I don't think of myself as a survivor.
Okay.
I think
I should have cleared
a survivor is, there's a certain amount of caution involved with it, And I did see that I was going to kill myself at a certain point and then I left New York and went to California, just lived in the country for the first time in my life. But, there's different senses of being a survivor, but to me, taking a risk has always been the most important thing with
Obviously.
work. So, to survive doesn't mean much, really, in light of, if you're not
I just meant in
doing
terms
something new or,
I just meant in terms of the situation you were involved in, it seems to come out of that.
I don't know how I came out of it, when other people didn't. I mean, a lot of people did come out of it, that is cops or work for the phone company, something like that, I mean, I just happened to care about writing, and I had I guess it was natural in some way because I come from like 3 generations of bartenders, so I really don't have too much artistic blood flowing through me, I don't think, in a hereditary sense. I don't know if anybody in my family who's really been in the arts, involved in the arts in any way. So, I don't know what the story is with that, but I don't know why. I think I do know why in a certain way. It's also why I was able to write when I was very young. I had an ability to distance myself from my own body when I was very young, And people I used to have to get these tests because they thought I had epilepsy or something, because I used to go into these like trances when I was standing around waiting for a basketball game to be over. If I had the next game, I just they called me, Daisy, because I just go into these dazes. And I would really space out. And I hung around with 2 other guys who were epileptics, It's a real epileptic scene, but I didn't have epilepsy. I just, I had a very strong imagination, and I could put myself out of it and see, what was happening. I could slow things down when I was young enough to separate the bullshit from what was real. And when I lost that ability,
What point did you lose that ability?
I don't know. I think I lost it it probably had something to do with puberty or something, I guess. I mean, when I was about 14, I lost it. And then the only way I could get it back was with heroin, which is a drug which slows down the landscape a lot and lets you see things, for what they are. At first, and then it's very vile and it gets you sooner or later, I went a long time using heroin without it getting me, Then when it got me real bad, But, so, it was like, I had this ability to separate, so that's why when I write the diaries, I could goof on a lot of people, but I could also see when I was, I goof on myself a lot too, because I knew when I was screwing up, and I saw when, towards the end, it's just, most of the book is about just fooling around with different drugs and stuff.
Yeah, but it says a lot more than that. You make a really interesting distinction at one point about how a lot of people look down on younger people who use dope and this and that. Yet it's when the older people and the rock people and the accountants who use it, who can afford to get the treatment and all that, which I thought was interesting and made me look at it in a different light. That maybe the ones who are using it, who know what the risks are and don't have those kind of outlets are.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's just, I mean, if it wasn't for like the boom of drugs moving out into, out of the city and into, Westchester, or, you know, it would, no one would have ever cared about drug programs in the cities. I mean, actually, like take methadone, which is what most inner city kids are relegated to when it's their only, possibility of an alternative, that or kicking cold. Most guys try and kick cold about 3 or 4 times, don't do it, so they go on methadone. Then you go on a 21-day detox, and then you go on, then that never works. You go right back to the streets, and so then you get on methadone maintenance, and that's just like an outpatient prison. I mean, the only reason they have that is because they know people are stoned, they're straight, and so they're not going to go out and steal and cause crime problems because they're on this drug, the substitute drug. But it's really like 12 times more potent than heroin and infinitely harder to get off.
These are what the kids are getting.
Yeah, and I guess, I think that people who are in, like, John Phillips or someone, has a cocaine problem, he goes to this place, and it's like my blue heaven,
Holiday camp.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy for the guy, although I could definitely state, without looking at any statistics, that it certainly would be a hell of a lot easier to get off drugs there than it would be to get off the methadone program by yourself without any. I mean, the counselors at these programs are a joke. They don't counsel you at all. All they do is bug you to pay your Medicaid bill at the end of the month, I mean, so it's really, you don't get any support at all. In California, on the other hand, they actually, I think because of Jerry Brown, they actually did have decent drug programs where it was more like the counselors cared more and they gave you more incentive to get off and, to lower your dose. I mean, in New York, it's very difficult to even, if you're on 100 milligrams of methadone, which is equal to, like about, $300 of pure heroin, or not pure heroin, street heroin a day. They urge you to stay on that. You got to go through a lot of red tape to get off of it. And in these other programs in California, you could just cut down at your own will, So it's just like in New York, it's just a political thing to keep people from, going back to the streets and keeping the crime rate down.
Well, that brings something up. In your book, and particularly the Basketball Diaries, New York takes on a whole personality of its own. How different do you think it would have been for you if you had grown up instead of in the Lower East Side or Upper West, whatever, if you had been out in L.A. or Chicago or some place a little bit different? Do you think things would have happened the same, or?
Well, if I grew up in L.A., I'd probably get high and
Listen to the Beach Boys.
Go cruise to tacos instead of pizza. I don't know. I don't know what the difference would be. In L.A. I could have had a completely different circumstance, but I mean, the alternatives there. Chicago is really, not much different than New York in a lot of ways, and well, New York. It's impossible for me to answer that because New York is so ingrained, especially in that book. I mean, the hero of that book is New York City,
That's right.
So it's really a difficult thing to think about in those terms. I always thought I was really blessed to grow up in New York City. I felt like I was, God put me in like this great city, to grow up in, instead of growing up in China or in England or something. I was growing up in, I mean, of course, later I go to London or something and think, well, I wish I grew up in London. I feel some kind of strange, some kind of strange, integral feeling in London when I'm there to, you start thinking, I felt the same in Russia one time when I was walking down the Nevsky Prospect. I felt and maybe that's why I really love Russian writers a lot, that I just felt like I was really at home there for some reason, you know. It was like 4 in the morning walking down Nevsky Prospect, you know, and there's really no crime there or anything, so, there's no crime, street crime in that sense. I mean, the whole country's a crime for what it does to its people.
Right.
But,
I was going to bring that up.
but, I mean, you know, you can do things safely because everyone's so scared to go out there. I mean, because of the government.
Well, as an outsider, you can do things
Yeah.
safely. What about...
And so, you know, maybe that's some weird reincarnation trip or something, you know. I don't really believe in that bullshit, but, I mean, 'cause I'm a Catholic boy, but, I mean, when I was young, I really felt like New York was it, you know, that was, and I wouldn't trade anything, you know. New York was where I grew up, and you just get an energy there that you don't get anyplace else.
What about the kids today in New York? Do you have much contact with them? Kids that were growing up in the same situation you were? Are they much different?
No, they're exactly the same, except everything's more accessible to them, I imagine. I mean, it's funny, because the Basketball Diaries is written, I mean, it seems very distant to me now. I always speak of a guy like myself in the third person almost, you know,
Yeah.
like he did this, because it seems like a different person to me from my own situation now. Kids who like come and see me at a club and come up to me or something to sign a book or just get an autograph or something, or come to a show and try and get backstage or something, or see me outside, they always, like, you know, any kid from like 20 years old or down, who are the kids I really like to see at shows, you know. And I hate clubs or theaters where, you know, kids under 21 can't get in, go at 18 because of drinking laws, you know.
Yeah.
I used to take a lot of kids in San Francisco through the back door and tell the guy they were my cousins and let them, like, watch from the wings, you know. Because I always thought those are the guys you could really play to, you know. But those kids, when they come up, they invariably, you know, tell me, they expect, see, the book ended for them, and they thought my life froze or something.
That's
right there.
the
So they
impression I
come
got.
up and they keep thinking I'm going to whip out a bottle of Carbona or something and ask them if I want to get high, you know, if they want to get high.
But it's still a
with me.
timely book. It's still...
Yeah, so, but they don't realize that my life went on, unfortunately, through all these other changes and stuff. Or fortunately, whatever, it was this time, it's in the past, I don't know. But,
What were the changes that brought you into music, specifically? How did it all come about?
It mainly came about, I guess, because I saw Patti Smith when she was out in California after she had her accident, and I just, you know, when I was in California, I wasn't listening to any music. I wasn't. The summer I left New York was the summer the Velvet Underground broke up, and I went to see them practically every night at Max's Kansas City. That's when Patti was first starting rock and roll. And Patti and I had been together for a couple of years when she was like a clerk at a bookstore. And I, you know, got her into writing and stuff. She was doing these drawings all the time.
She did Babylon then, too.
Yeah, but Babel was
Babel,
actually the poems that she started to write during that period, you know. And she hadn't really started writing when we were first together. And so when she came out, I didn't have any contact with her until she had this accident. Then she'd call me up because she was lying in bed in traction. She found out my phone number in California, and we speak a lot on the phone. And then when she got better, and you know, she put out her most commercial album, Easter, and she had that hit, the Springsteen song that she wrote.
Because the Night?
Because the Night, yeah. And
Frederick Part A.
Yeah, right. That's right. Well, I don't know. That was like, I saw her when she came out there, and then we did this, some guys in San Francisco when they played there wanted us to do this little bit in this movie together, you know, so we did that. Then I went down to San Diego with her for the next stop in her tour, you know, and what happened was there was some freak thing happened, and the opening act got kicked out, you know, because Patty didn't like them. And it was her show, so she could do that. And so she said, Jim will open up the show, you know, just doing, we'll do what we did last night for this movie, you know, which was me just rapping this stuff while she was playing the guitar. And that was a scary proposition because Patty playing the guitar is awful. And I wasn't going to get out there with a sheet of paper in front of this audience and just start reading, you know. It seemed kind of boring, you know, compared when they were expecting a rock and roll band.
So they start applauding by snapping their fingers.
What I did was I just started to, I had some songs I've been writing for the Blue Oyster Cult at the time, so just some lyrics. So I said, just have the guys in the band play some music, I'll rap these songs, you know, because I had them memorized. It's the only things I had memorized, so I wouldn't have to get out there holding something, you know. And I did it, and we did it for about 10 minutes. It went over great, you know. And then I felt this rock and roll audience energy for the first time in my life. And it was really a lot different than like giving a poetry reading or something. So it was kids receiving things to their heart instead of their intellect so much. And it was just very visceral and, you know, had a lot more edge to it. So I went back to San Francisco and took some of these song lyrics I was writing, just using myself instead of giving them to other people. And I worked on them, and some guys asked me at this punk club, like the San Francisco version of CBGB's, you know, the Mabuhay Gardens it was called. It's a Filipino restaurant during the day and a punk rock club at night. Do this reading there, so I said, well, instead of reading, I was, you know, this would be our first gig, you know, and it went over great, you know. We did 2 gigs and I had a record contract. My musician friends hated me. They had been going for 10 years trying to get a record contract.
Who got you the contract? Was it Earl McGrath from Rolling Stone Records? Or?
Yeah, well, I went to New York because the Basketball Diaries was just coming out then by this guy in California, you know, and I made a deal with Bantham and I went to New York to do that, you know. And so I went to Earl McGrath, he was around the art scene. I used to work for this painter, Larry Rivers, and he was a real good friend of his. And so I went to see Earl. I was going to take the tape to Arista, you know, Patty's label,
yeah,
to Clyde Davis, or to Columbia. I knew some people, like I knew the guys in the Blue Oyster Cult, and I was going to take it there. But I took it to Earl because I knew the only other guy in the Stones label was Peter Tosh. He was the president of Rolling Stones Records, which is distributed by Atlantic. And I knew the only guy in the label besides the Stones was Tosh, though they obviously didn't want new artists, you know. I knew they only had Tosh because the Stones were into reggae,
yeah,
you know. And it was kind of that little trip. So I played him the tape, and he freaked out. You know, I thought he hated it. It was like 2 minutes. He was just lying on a couch in the office after listening to it. He didn't say a word, you know. But no one said a word for 5 minutes after Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. He thought that bomb too. So anyway, he jumped up and said, "This is very strong. This is very different." And actually, it was very different because it was just this demo tape that we made in the studio for like $100, and it sounded a lot stranger than the nature of the songs actually were, you know, just because of the quality.
And who was doing Sing Speak then, anyway?
Yeah, and Keith, he says Keith wants to produce a record. This is it, I know. And the next night, Keith Richards called me up, you know. So all of a sudden, I'd gotten off a plane, and within like 48 hours, I was on a Stones label, you know. I had to meet with Jagger, and that was a whole scene in itself, you know.
Tell me about it.
Well, he wasn't as receptive because he didn't think it was commercial, you know. He said, he picks his nose and says, you know, all the time. You know? He says,
well, when
it's not, you know, I don't want you to write anything formula, you know what I mean? But I mean, we can't even go on radio in LA now except for one song. And then I thought, you know, like this guy thinks on a business level and a musical level and so many different levels at once. I saw then that Mick Jagger ran the Rolling Stones, you know. I mean, it's not Mick and Keith, it's Mick, really, you know.
How do you get along with Keith?
I got along great with Keith. I really loved him.
He came out
and he played with us a couple times.
Danceteria, you came out, right? For the thing for the album, for the.
No, it was at Trax actually, and then he played with us another time too. But Trax was a big thing. And then Mick, I really liked Mick a lot too. I got along with him very well after a while too. Eventually Earl left the Stones label. He quit as president and then became my manager, and I just went to the parent company, Atlantic, you know, in Tacko. So I wound up getting all this publicity for being on the Stones label.
A lot of publicity.
Yeah, and then also because the basketball diaries were out then too, you know, and it's like this parlay right in one to the other. They were supposed to come out together, but they didn't. They came out about 4 months apart, and I thought that actually it turned out really for the better, I guess, you know, if you wanted to think in those terms. But it was really like, you know, there was almost something. I mean, it was very lucky actually that I got away from. I mean, then Tosh left the Stones label too because there was really nobody there to run it anymore after Earl left. It's like, you know, a lot of it, like when Keith played with us, you know, there's a lot of people say it's just another, you know, thing of the Rolling Stones, you know. I mean, it's kind of like a very hard hump to get over, so I was glad to get away from it in a certain way. But then again, you know, if anybody asked me, these people are like, you know, the Stones, you're around them, it's a drag or something, I'd say, man, you know, how can I, you know, not want to be around the Stones? They're rock and roll.
Well, you got your own little school too. Jim, I think your band's calling you, so
oh yeah?
You may not consider yourself a survivor, but I consider you an incredible one, and prolific and all that stuff. This is Jim Carroll on The World It Is. I'm Chris Epting. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Hey, could you sign a copy of the basketball diaries for me?
Sure.
Thanks. I brought it along. Special. Janice, want to get that book out?